TV umpire to director, we have a review. Can you rock and roll it for me, please?
Welcome to another episode of Rock and Roll It. And we've had an extraordinary week at the Asia Cup. Firstly, we had India and Pakistan meeting in an Asia Cup final for the first time. Then we had what is increasingly a rarity these days, which was an actual close match, in fact, a thriller between India and Pakistan. And then we had the very odd circumstances of a trophy celebration without the actual trophy, with India not receiving the trophy from the Asian Cricket Council chief. And since we've had such an extraordinary week of cricket, we thought we'd do an extraordinary episode of this podcast. So we've given Sid Monga and KK a break, and we have Shashank Kishore, who was our India correspondent at the Asia Cup, and Danyal Rasool, who was our Pakistan correspondent at the Asia Cup. And it's an extraordinary episode more than anything because this is the first episode where I'm the person with the most facial hair on this podcast. So that's what actually makes it extraordinary more than anything else. But let me start with talking about what happened after the final. Daniel and Shashank, you were there, and Daniel, you can start by telling us what actually happened in that 60 minutes plus, or it was closer to 90 minutes, I think, after the final, where most of us were just watching reruns on TV of what had happened in the match. But what was actually going on the ground in that period?
It was a very strange feeling. And when it started, I think what the ACC seemed to do, everyone seemed to essentially corral the journalists first into the press conference room saying Pakistan might just appear immediately, because as soon as the winning runs were hit, Pakistan walked out and essentially entered their dressing rooms. There was no clarity on whether they'd come back. The Indian team were in a huddle to one side, presumably just waiting for the presentations. So Shashank and I first went into the press conference room. For a while, it looked like not much was happening there, and we thought we should split up. So I came back upstairs to where I could see what was going on with the presentation ceremony. For a little while, that essentially held. The status quo held. India were there, Pakistan were not. There was no sign of the presentation stage essentially being set up. And then a little while later, Mohsin Naqvi, who's the president of the ACC and also the PCB chairman, and also Pakistan's interior minister, actually, he then walked in, getting ready to present the trophy, I think, to the Indian side, because that's essentially what the ACC president does. It wasn't clear. No one had clarified why there was a delay. I think on broadcast, Ravi Shastri, Wasim Akram seemed to be getting frustrated as well. But then a little while later, the stage was set up. Mohsin Naqvi and a few other dignitaries assumed their place on stage. The Pakistan team also showed up. By now, the fans had almost largely gone. There were a few pockets of Indian fans still remaining who wanted to see India get presented with the trophy, but not much else was happening. But when Naqvi was got up on stage, there was no movement from the Indian side to get ready for the presentation ceremony. Simon Dool, who was conducting the presentations, looked no closer to starting them. And we now understand, it's pretty clear now, that India appeared to have decided. It's not clear when they took this decision, because Sky at the post-match seemed to say it was a decision they took on the field. But then again, there's been suggestions this was decided before, that they would not receive their trophy from Mohsin Naqvi. This is in line with, I think, the line India have taken over the past 2 weeks. They've limited any optional interaction between India and Pakistan. There haven't been any handshakes, obviously, and then and no post-match greetings either. About 90 minutes after after the final runs had been scored, Simon Dool did begin the presentations. Mohsin Naqvi did not leave the stage, as it's been reported apparently that India wanted him to do. But he had almost nothing to do with the actual ceremony itself. There's so much has happened that I almost forgot to mention. At some stage between this, some official just got up, picked up the trophy from where it was stood, and just walked out of the ground with it. We still haven't seen the trophy since, by the way. So we don't even know if that person was authorized to do what they did. But Naqvi had almost no role within the actual presentation itself. When the Indian players received their individual awards, he didn't applaud any of them, and they didn't receive their awards from him, but from other dignitaries out there. When the Pakistan team got up to take their runner-up medals and then they checked, Mohsin Naqvi did pose briefly with Salman Ali Agha, but that was about it. And then the presentation itself mercifully seemed to go without any further incident. I don't think either the Indian captain or the Pakistan captain referred to the off-field unpleasantries that had happened. But yeah, the bottom line is India then got up on stage and celebrated with an imaginary trophy, and one that they later photoshopped into their social media reels, because the actual trophy wasn't presented. And Simon Dule said that the ACC had decided, it appeared, not to present that trophy to India on the night. Eventually, you'd think they'll get it, but for now, we don't know where that trophy is.
Astonishingly, the one thing that really, I don't think this was captured on the live broadcast or on what people saw on TV. But essentially, there was one point during the post-match scenes where the dignitaries, including Mohsin Naqvi, were on the dais for about 20 minutes or 25 minutes, and Mohsin Naqvi was looking absolutely right down into his phone and seemingly texting somebody. Whatever happened, we don't know. And I believe there were a lot of negotiations taking place as to who they would receive the trophy from. Ultimately, nothing came of that, and Mohsin Naqvi stood still, wanting to, make the presentation and be at the presentation, as against reports that India didn't want him on stage. And it was only after about 20-25 minutes of all of them standing there on the dais did, the presentation eventually take off. So in between the supposed start of the press conference to the, when the presentation actually finished and then the press conference is finished, I think it was about 2 a.m. in the morning by the time we wrapped up from the ground. And yeah, long after. In fact, at the press conference, when the Pakistan media manager came in, wanting to introduce Salman Aga, people wished him good morning. That was how late it was, well beyond, limits. So yeah, unreal night of drama culminating in somewhat farcical scenes towards the end, which somewhat also took away the sheen from the cricket because it was one of the more closely contested India-Pakistan games in the T20 format.
Yeah, I guess the question a lot of people have is that we knew that Mohsin Naqvi was going to present the trophy because they did actually send out a release, right? The ACC saying that, or Mohsin Naqvi saying that he would want to present the trophy, or he was looking forward to presenting the trophy to the winning team. And I guess a question a lot of people have is purely from the viewing point of view, why couldn't some of these negotiations have happened before, or why couldn't there have been more clarity? Because, as you said, it looked like negotiations were happening live after the match for about 90 minutes and everyone's just waiting around, not knowing what will happen? Or was there simply, or is it just such an extraordinary circumstance where this was kind of bound to happen? Because one of the things we were talking about even before the game was what will happen if India win? Because Naqvi has already said that he's going to present the trophy. I guess if he doesn't do it now, then it's going to look like he's backtracking on what he said. So was it just one of those situations where it was almost always sort of bound to end like this?
I mean, I
I
I
think
know of certain communication that took place after the first game that India and Pakistan played on September 14th, when Handshake Gate, first surfaced and all that we witnessed in the aftermath of that. It was around then itself that, the Indian team management decided that should they get to the final and also be in a position where they're going to win it, they're not going to, take the trophy from or collect the trophy from Mohsin Naqvi. Of course, it wasn't made official at that point because obviously the team felt that they would be, blowing their trumpet by thinking that, they'd get that far and even be in a position to win it. So it was all, kept under wraps until it got to a position where they will finally win it or, have a chance to win it. So yeah, the timing of it completely, blew everyone up there. Surely could have been done a lot earlier and should have definitely been negotiated in that 1 day gap between the end of the India Sri Lanka game and the final.
I think what puzzles me about the whole saga is why everyone seemed to be on their phones and why everyone seemed to be negotiating. Because what we knew about 2 weeks ago, and I think even most casual cricket supporters knew 2 weeks ago, was that this was bound to happen. There was no way India were going to accept that trophy from the ACC president after not having shaken hands with Salman Ali Agha and the Pakistan team. And at the same time, there appeared to be no way that Naqvi could be seen to have backed down and just not appear on stage. So what I think is unfair to both the fans who stayed back and just the Indian team and even the Pakistan team, everyone, there was just that delay, that 90-minute delay, because I think it was clear to everyone that nothing was going to get resolved in those 90 minutes. What you've not been able to successfully negotiate over 2 weeks, you're not going to negotiate in front of people who are analyzing and assessing your every move. If India had decided they weren't going to take the trophy from Naqvi, ultimately there's only so much Naqvi can do. He can't physically hand over a trophy they don't want to take from him. So I think what ultimately happened, if that's what was going to happen anyway with no trophy presentation, it could just have been done in the first half hour, because it became clear to, I think it became clear to everyone watching that a resolution of any kind of satisfactory nature was never going to emerge from that night.
Yeah, and then of course after this whole situation with the trophy, you had the press conferences, which you guys, I know we actually had this podcast late in the day today to give you guys some time to rest because you were there till late. But then Salman Agha comes out, of course, and he says that, I mean, he used some strong words to describe India's decisions through the tournament, declining the handshake. But he also indicated that he didn't think that this was necessarily coming from the players, because he said that he did shake Surya Kumar's hand. He said twice, right? Before, off camera. I think one of them may have been briefly captured on camera. So he was then quite strong in his opinion on India not shaking hands. What was the mood like? I mean, for all of you guys, I mean, just before this final, after the final, it must have been something quite different from what you would have experienced before as cricket reporters.
That press conference didn't seem to go in the direction that it ultimately did go into. Sometimes we've all covered these press conferences where one question seems to set it off. And he began just talking about the Pakistan side and what they'd done and what they hadn't done in terms of how close they came and didn't win the game. But then there was a question about the way the question was phrased was about India's behavior. And then one of the things that Salman Ali Agha has done reasonably consistently is, I think he mildly criticized the no handshake thing even before the final. He said that it had never happened before. And so that's something that he's been consistent on. I think Mike Hesson, one of these times, also came out and said that he thought cricketers should shake hands before and after games. But yeah, he seemed to go a little bit further in during the final. And there was an interesting moment where I think the Pakistan media manager appeared to turn to him. They seemed to have prepared for that moment, but Agha seemed to go that little bit further anyway, and went quite hard at what he thought was setting a bad example, and India being bad role models in his words. I think it's just one of those things where the more you talk about it, the more everyone sort of becomes entrenched in their own positions and just feeds off that position. But yeah, that I thought was interesting. It was interesting for Agha to put Surya Kumar Yadav in the position that he did, where he said, "I thought if it had been left up to the Indian captain, he would have no problem shaking my hand." Because we should remember, of course, that what's been happening these past 2 weeks is legitimately unprecedented in India-Pakistan relations. We've always had shaken hands, we've always had interactions with the team. And despite whatever seems to be going on off the field, either cricketing wise or politically, you could never really say that there's been a time when the Indian players and the Pakistan players legitimately dislike or hate each other. We've never seen that before. So I think that may have been what Agha was referring to, where he said, well, Surya Kumar Yadav shook my hand before, and if he wasn't under the pressure that he's in, this is Salman's implication, he'd have no problem doing it again.
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about India-Pakistan relations never having been like this. In fact, 2 years ago, if you remember at the Asia Cup, I mean, they were downright pally with each other. In fact, there were memes about how much Virat Kohli and Shadab Khan seemed to enjoy each other's company. Even Haris Rauf and Shaheen Afridi were interacting in a very friendly way with all the India players. And I mean, it's been a
Shaheen gave
stark.
Jasprit Bumrah a gift as well for the birth of his child. Yeah, it's quite friendly around that time.
Yeah, we were
And
doing
there are a couple
stories.
of pictures
Yeah.
of the India-Pakistan cricketers hanging around at the ICC Academy. There's a coffee shop or a tea shop on the side, and that owner had hung a couple of pictures of players, as a badge of honor to say that they've all been his customers, and it prominently featured India-Pakistan cricketers as well. So yeah, there's been a lot of bonhomie that you've seen at that very venue, at the training ground with teams, training side by side. The last time the Asia Cup came here to Dubai in 2022, and even in 2023 in Ahmedabad in the 50 over World Cup, as tense as the atmosphere was with the crowd being hugely Indian and 120,000 or how many ever Indian fans had come into the ground, and hardly any Pakistani presence because of visas weren't made available to them or whatever. Even then, you while the atmosphere was tense, there was the basic courtesy extended at press conferences, pre-match press conferences, or at training. You didn't quite see the same kind of hostility between the two sides. It may have been tense on the field, but it was certainly fairly okay, fairly relaxed off the field during the entire tournament, not just when India played Pakistan in Ahmedabad, but I also covered a few of their games in Hyderabad, and they were superbly received by the crowd. There was one game against Sri Lanka where I think they chased 300 plus. Rizwan made runs in that chase, and he was hailed a hero by the crowd. And Rizwan said,
He enjoyed his acting as much as his
He's
batting, I
never
think, in that match.
yeah, that was a game where you saw a little bit of theatrics as well, with all the cramps, and I think that's where he also made that comment, right? Sometimes I
Yeah.
act and whatever. So yeah, the crowd was really he was one of the crowd favorites there. So even during that tournament, as recently as 2023, it didn't seem as bad as what it's turned out to be now.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I remember the pre-tournament press conference for that World Cup, and Rohit and Babar were both there, and there were a lot of photos. There was a photo shoot with them being very friendly with each other. They were asked about, do you guys chat with each other? And they were talking about how they discussed things like what cars we should buy and stuff like that. And it was all very respectful and friendly. Um,
They
in
flew
this
on the
tournament,
same charter flight as well, I think, for that captain's press conference.
right. And of course, now, of course, there have been political events, there's been a military conflict in between. So we all expected things to be different. Uh, Surya Kumar did say at the start of the tournament, after the first match against Pakistan, that the BCCI and the Indian government were aligned in their approach to the match. But I don't think he's confirmed, Shashank, right, whether he was actually directed not to shake hands. And certainly in this case, in fact, he's been explicit in saying that not receiving the trophy was the team's choice and it didn't come from any other source necessarily. Is that right?
Yeah, that's as much as we can infer from the comments Surya made. But again, no one has come out to say that these were strictly on the instructions of the board or certain officials, that they didn't shake hands or they didn't, want to make any contact. Because I mean, the optics obviously when India play Pakistan is. It's a whole different level altogether, right? I mean, there's so much scrutiny on what everyone's doing, and that
Yeah, I mean,
scrutiny is.
let's be honest. There was a lot of noise in India, Shashank, with people saying that the match shouldn't be played. So there was pressure on both the BCCI and the team. There were a lot of news outlets calling for the match to simply be boycotted. So we have to put everything also into the context of that. Yeah.
And also, I think a lot of this blew up even more after visuals of Surya shaking hands with Mohsin Naqvi at the pre-captain's event went viral on social media, and I don't know if that kind of triggered a reaction or whatever. But obviously, we've seen how volatile social media can be, and players got a lot of criticism for that. But again, that's something that only the Indian team management and the players can come clean about, which I'm not sure they'd really want to at this point of time. A lot has been said, a lot has been, done. This tournament has been as much about, I mean, more about the off-field drama, board room matters, match referee hearings, a team not turning up, a team holding the tournament, I don't know if hostage is the right word, but Pakistan didn't turn up on time for their match, and that's because they didn't want the match referee. So a lot of things have gone off the field, and it just took away the spotlight from the kind of cricket that we actually saw.
Yeah, and I'm sure this is an ongoing story. I wish I could promise you guys that this was the last podcast or last article that you would have to write about this issue, but I'm sure you'll have to write many more. But now let's get into the actual cricket because we did see a fantastic final in the end. After India had dominated Pakistan in the first two matches of the tournament, in this match it was really competitive. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say, and Daniel, I don't know if you agree with me, but it felt like Pakistan had massive openings in this match, both in the first and in the second innings. In fact, with 6 overs left, I want to start there because 6 overs left in the game, it was 63 or 64 to win. So the required rate almost up to 11. The spinner seemingly had a stranglehold on India, both Saim Ayub and Abrar Ahmad. India were struggling to get them away. I think our win forecaster was at that point giving Pakistan a 70% chance of winning. But then they decide to give the next over to Haris Rauf and not bowl out Sam Ayob on a pitch that was taking spin, on a pitch that was slow. They end up changing Abrar Ahmad's end. Daniel, help us understand that decision to give Haris Rauf that over, which ended up being, I think, the over that really changed the momentum of the game.
Yeah, this is one of those where you have to be careful not to essentially analyze by hindsight. But one of the things that looked to be happening to me around that time was a captaincy by formula. One of the things that Pakistan appeared to have done was once they start bowled Shaheen, three Shaheen overs out in the power play, they seemed to be worried about the fact that they may not have enough quality, a high pace towards the back end of the innings. And this obviously doesn't happen in a vacuum. We saw when Pakistan needed to use a spinner once before in an India-Pakistan game and wait till the 20th over, and it cost them. So I think one of the things Pakistan had in their mind was, well, we hold Haris Rauf back, and then once we hold him back, we bowl him towards the back end. And when you have three Haris overs left, I think Salman seemed to be thinking, okay, so who am I getting my overs from? We're getting three from Haris, and I think what he didn't seem to quite grasp at one point was that Saim and Abrar weren't just getting through the overs. They were the players who may potentially have won in the match. And when they both bowled 3 overs each, I think India in the last 4 or 5 overs had scored something like 29 runs in the last five. And at that point, um, 2 more overs potentially of the same, because Tilak Varma didn't seem to be looking to get spin away in the same way that he managed to with Haris Rauf. That potentially could have swung the game. And but once you bowl Haris for that 15th over, then you're locked in. You're locked into that pattern because you have to bowl out Shaheen. It's one of those games where you can't leave Shaheen's overs unused. And once you bowl Shaheen, you have to bowl a spinner for the 17th over because Haris can't bowl two in a row towards the end. So I think it all hinged on India essentially targeting Haris for that 15th over, because Pakistan had banked on him as their potential match winner to the back end at the back end. And then when their match winner essentially became their weak link, Pakistan simply ran out of legitimate options to be able to get through all of their overs. And then you saw them making a lot of suboptimal choices. Even the final over with 10 remaining, I think if you don't have the scars of Melbourne in 2022, could you potentially give that to a spinner? Or do you give that to Harris, who's already gone for plenty? So it's interesting. It's one of those where maybe if they'd held Harris back even for one more over, the rate gets too much. You may get a wicket and things might change. But yeah, once again, I thought they came back in after the power play to a formula where Harris would bowl three of the last six. And when that didn't quite work, I don't think they had a plan B.
But what surprised me even more than them not going back to Nawaz, because I agree with him, there was a rationale that you have two lefties at the crease. But then you have Sam Ayub, who's bowled 3 overs for just 16 runs and hasn't bowled his fourth over. I mean, the simple way to go about it would be have just to gone ahead with Abrar Ahmad for the 15th and then trusted Sam Ayub with the 16th and then brought in Haris Rauf and or bowl Shaheen and bowl Haris just in the or Rauf just in the 18th and the 20th. That would have been one way to go about it, where you don't even have to bowl Nawaz, but you at least get one more over out of Sam Ayub, because they were struggling to get him away. And he is someone who could have turned the ball away from the left-handers.
And he's picked
But
up wickets in the tournament. It's not like he's gone for
yeah,
runs.
but even after they made that decision, Daniel, the thing that was also surprising was even with Roff's bowling, they finally went to this plan of bowling over the wicket, outside the arc, wide outside off, only in Haris's second over. And it actually almost worked. It's just that he got the last ball wrong. But I mean, do you think that's an indication of the lack of planning in this Pakistan team, that he started off bowling round the wicket and actually kind of feeding Tilak and Shivam Dube where they want the ball in their hitting arc, rather than him bowling, to a plan, bowling wide off and setting the appropriate field?
I think that's one of the things with Haris where Pakistan do view him as what they call one of their premium champion fast bowlers. But sometimes when the pressure is on, he's never someone they viewed as a thinking fast bowler. There are examples in the past from where Haris essentially in a lot of these high pressure games has, I wouldn't say cost them, but has conceded the runs that essentially set the stage for them losing. A lot of people do mention that those two sixes that Kohli hit of him. The first one was that incredible shot, but even then, what Haris does in response, he goes even faster. Kohli onto Kohli's pads, who's allowed to then whip him away for six. The following World Cup against the USA, Pakistan, I think the US needed 13 to win off the last three balls, and Haris is bowling and he continues to go fast. He's essentially he's not accurate. He's missing his lines. They're going to a super over that they lose. Haris, I think this was a pitch where essentially the ball wasn't coming onto the bat and the spin and the spinners were essentially keeping India in some kind of chokehold. But Harris's natural instincts around that time, when he wants to kill a game off, he will go as fast as he possibly can. And when he came around the wicket, he has this idea of how to get a batter out in those situations, and that is to knock back their stumps. And that's the most direct route to that for the left-handers, is to come around the wicket. And obviously, that's exactly what India wanted. India wanted pace on the ball. And one or two overs there would potentially have made Salman Ali Azad's calculations a lot more complicated. That second last over, I thought he was a little bit unlucky. That final six obviously changes the equation, but it had been a game where you could tell when Haris is expensive, he goes for really big runs. You could tell Pakistan didn't have any good options in the last two overs. They had to bowl Haris, and at the same time, Haris potentially even had almost no confidence that he was going to be able to execute in the way they wanted. It's one of those frustrating things with Haris where when he is on fire, he can genuinely be unplayable because he is among the fastest bowlers in the world. But then when you need that little bit of wild, that canniness that Shaheen had, for example, in the 17th over, Haris sometimes does lack that, and it does hold his game back.
Yeah, Shashank, of course, Pakistan, slightly strange tactics. As a result of that, they also had to change ends from Abrar Ahmad, and then he ended up going for 11 in his last over. So a lot of things went wrong for them in those last 6 overs. But obviously, the big story from India's point of view is just the batting of both Shivam Dube and Tilak Varma. Of course, Tilak Varma winning the player of the match. But I want to start with Dube because he's been a player who's actually had a pretty difficult last 12 months. He didn't have the best IPL. In fact, when this 15 was announced, there were people saying that there's actually a bit of surprise that Dube is even in the 15. There were doubts about him, certainly as a bowler, about how much India would actually be able to use him as a bowler. In this game, India have actually trusted him as their fifth bowler, not even as the sixth bowling option. With Hardik Pandya gone, quite surprised that India didn't replace Hardik with, say, Harshit Rana or somebody to bolster the bowling. Instead, they said we'll stick with 8 batters and trust Dube to bowl his fair share of the overs. But this was massive for him, and we saw again. There's been a lot of sort of narratives about Dube in the last year or so that he's lost his ability to hit spin, and he hit spin in this game, of course. Or at least he took the pacers down and showed that he still has that hitting ability. So this is a pretty definitive innings for him in his career, right?
Absolutely. I mean, talking about Dube, I think the one thing that I'm willing to, stick my neck out and say, having watched every single practice session that India conducted in this tournament, especially more so in the first half, that I think Dube would have probably bowled maximum number of overs among all Indian bowlers, hands down. That's the kind of attention to detail that the team management has gone into with Dube. It was almost as if Morne Morkel was his exclusive bowling coach because every session he was by his side, monitoring him, working with him, uh, working on his run up, working on different things. And I think Monet touched upon this in one of the press conferences where he said they worked on Dube using his height to hit certain lengths on these surfaces, varying his pace because for somebody who bowls in the 120s, uh, pace variation is very. He said it's very. It has to be subtle. It can't be like suddenly you go drop down to 90 or 95 kph. So they worked on a lot on bowling the cutters. So he's kind of been at it non-stop. In fact, done more bowling than batting in the nets. And I think probably they thought that that's the role that they see him play, even with Hardik in the mix, because I think they had pre-decided that Jasprit Bumrah will be the what do you say, power play front loader for India. So he's done a lot of bowling. So on the bowling front, I think he's come on leaps and bounds. More so because, and it's heartening for India because he doesn't bowl a lot in the IPL, right? I think he's bowled one over or something in the last couple of seasons, primarily because of the impact player rule. So they've put in a lot of effort with him, as a bowler. And with the batting as well, I was just looking at strike rates. I mean, pre World Cup, uh, before he got selected for the 2024 T20 World Cup, From 2023 to 2024, it was 166 or 170 against spin. And then considerably that dropped to about 120 since then. And this year also, there was a lot of spin that was brought on the moment Shivam Dube was in the crease. And just that struggle to get away kind of didn't really look good. So he had a lot to prove. And he spoke about having taken some time off after the IPL to figure out how he wanted to approach his batting. And one of the things that he said he worked on was to against high pace deliveries bowled on a length where the bowlers tried to cramp him for room, and where he struggles bringing out that pull shot. He said he had a propensity to keep getting top edges to those deliveries because he was a little late on the shot. So he worked on his backswing. He worked on bringing that the angle in, aligning himself in position where he's in a position to play that pull shot freely. So he's worked on that. He's worked on facing up to spinners better. So he said these are the aspects that he worked on between the Mumbai T20 League, where he played a handful of games, and the Asia Cup, the period in between where there was absolutely no domestic cricket. So I think this is a cricketer who's actually put in the work, the results of which we're seeing right now, at the Asia Cup.
Yeah. And of course, the other hero for India was Tilak Varma, the hero, the player of the match. It's been a strange few months for him because he had an IPL where he was actually retired out in a game, which was a very strange decision considering that he was the incumbent India number three. But then that led to discussions about whether Shreyas Iyer should actually be his replacement. And I mean, that's a separate discussion. Obviously, we don't know what Shreyas Iyer would have done in this tournament, but it is, I think, a massive victory for Tilak that he's ended up being the hero of the final. Daniel, as somebody who I don't know how much you've seen of Tilak before, but what stood out about you or what stood out about him to you in this game and in this tournament?
While while the game was going on, I was trying to get as much information about Tilak as possible, and this is the thing that I think Shashank mentioned, him being retired out and Hardik being quite harsh about why he'd done that and how he potentially cost his side games in the IPL in the past. I think one of the things that to me stood out, I was saying this to some of my colleagues during that chase, was Pakistan may go away and think, oh, we're quite close to India, we almost won this game. But then if you flip that chase and it was Pakistan chasing at any point in the last 10 overs and India defending, you would never have said, I think right down to when that six in the final over was hit, that Pakistan were favourites. Because Pakistan do not appear to produce those sorts of players that have the temperament that can handle that pressure, sustain that pressure, and then get them through in the final. And I think that was the thing where the little I've seen of Tilak and Dube, to be fair, didn't really stand them out as marquee generational talents. But in this game, when the pressure was on, they appeared to know the price of their wicket. When it was when it was tough going against Saim and Abrar, I thought, yeah, one wicket here and the game could break open. That didn't happen. We should remember, of course, that time when Harris appeared to take an absolute age to flick off the bails once Tilak was trying to dive in on a run out there. I remember when he collected when he collected the ball, I don't think Tilak was even in the frame, and then he didn't even dive properly because his bat was still in the air. And Harris, by the time the zing bells lit up, he was comfortably home. So there were those little moments that may have gone India's way, but aside from that, yeah, it's just that temperament and knowing when to accelerate and understanding when, if you're in a rut, you don't lose your wickets, because that stood in stark contrast to Pakistan's middle order. Pakistan had started well, but once that second and third wicket fell, there was no sense of, okay, we've had a bit of a rough patch, let's rein it in, and if we can't get to 190, at least let's try to get to 165, 170. And Tilak and Dube appeared to understand that brief extremely well, and when they needed to execute, I thought they did it quite nervously, which may not necessarily mark them out as the absolute defining talents of the side, but definitely ones that you can rely on in situations like these. And once you've done this and been through this, I think you're only stronger in future finals to come. So yeah, I think Indian fans can both be heartened and just really encouraged by what they've seen of him.
I think the one other thing that really stands out for not just Tilak but generally a lot of Indian cricketers is you generally don't have this kind of a lengthy break between tours. Like India had like a month long gap just from the end of the England tests to now, right? And in Tilak's case, even a lot longer because obviously he didn't play the test format. and he chose some time away to go to England, had a county deal with Hampshire, scored a couple of hundreds there. So he'd been in that match preparation mode coming into the Asia Cup. So it wasn't like he came in here, undercooked. And I think that may have also played a part in, him carrying on that form and that confidence factor, into the tournament.
Yeah, what also stood out is I remember in that game that he was retired out, I believe it was against LSG, right? Shashank, I think, if I'm not right, if I'm not wrong. And I think in that game, what he firstly had a bit of a hand injury, I believe, in that game, which was hampering him somewhat. But he was struggling to hit slower balls and pace off balls. He was struggling to generate pace on the ball. But two of the most crucial sixes he hit in this game, of course, did come off slower balls. One, of course, on the leg side of Haris. And then again in the final over, I think that was a slower ball that he hit for six when the match was still in the balance, because 10 of the last over, you favor the side batting, but we've seen 10 defended many times. We've seen matches go to super overs. That six really kind of finished the match off and made it very simple for India after that. So that's, I think, another thing he'll be really happy about, that even if this was a perceived weakness, playing slower balls, generating pace on the ball and not just hitting some of the quicker balls. He's hit two of the most crucial sixes in this game off slower balls.
And also that six of Abrar Ahmed, I mean, when he bowled length, it wasn't like it wasn't like it was tossed up and he had the free swing. So for him to hit that off the back foot also told you of, that brute strength and the ability to, that it showed that he hadn't clearly lost that ability against spin. It was just probably form or confidence at that point of time that really hampered him. But I think, yeah, three crucial sixes, if I may add, was incredible. The timing of it, and the last six that he hit in that final over, I think he was hitting that towards the longer boundary, because the offside boundary from that end from which the final over was bowled was the shorter one. So for him to hit it towards the longest pocket at deep backward square, told you of the confidence he had to take someone on, especially with the angle of the ball going away from him.
Yeah. As we said, there was a massive chance for Pakistan in the second innings, but also Daniel, a huge chance in the first innings after getting to 113 for one. I have a few theories, but let me just start with a simple question. What on earth happened there? 33 for 9, the collapse. What happened to that batting lineup?
It must be a strange thing being Saim Ayub, because you keep getting told that you're in the worst form of your life, and then yet for two Sundays in a row against India, it's actually when Saim Ayub gets out that Pakistan just completely implode. So which weirdly tells you that even though he's in bad form, somehow Pakistan seem to look upon his wicket as a bit of a as a bit of a sign that things are going wrong. Yeah, like I said, it's what the difference between India and Pakistan, and the difference between elite teams, I guess, and good teams, seems to be that recognition that 40 overs of a T20 game is a long time and will not always go your way. But when Pakistan had the first 10 overs, the first 12 overs yesterday, going their way, and then suddenly they lose a couple of wickets, there's no way they can sort of modulate their emotional temperature and rein back whatever seems to be slipping out of control. Because what Pakistan seemed to have come in was, we need everything to go right, and while that's going that way, we can potentially make a game of this. But as soon as India start gaining momentum, I don't think Pakistan appeared to understand that games change, patterns change, and you can still have a dominant position in the game, but just in a different way. I think there was no sense that they wanted to revise their targets. Once a couple of wickets fell, they also didn't seem to be clear on what they wanted to do. Did they want to send an anchor in, or did they want to send a hitter in? Because one of the things that they did was they sent in Harris, who's a bit of a hitter but not great against spin, and he was trying to play an inside-out cover drive on a pitch that doesn't really allow for that sort of timing. And then after that, they sent a couple of anchors. They sent Hussain Talat and Saibzada, and so Hussain Talat and the captain Agha. And then both of them got out slogging. If you're sending anchors in, I thought the idea behind that was, okay, now they're trying to revise what their target is and maybe bat out 2 or 3 overs. So if you're trying to slog, why not send out the players who are better at slogging anyway? So I think there was a lot of confusion around what paths to a competitive total they were taking once Saibzada, Farhan, Fakhar Zaman, Saim Ayub, the big three got out. And once they essentially couldn't understand how to go about doing that, India was superb. India didn't miss their lines. They knew when to bring Jasprit back. They knew how to use Kuldeep, who'd gone for 23 in his first two. And yeah, that momentum then slipped away from them and never came back until they started to bowl.
Yeah, I was
Just
looking at some.
that,
Sorry, go ahead, Shashank. Yeah.
I think just to add to the points that Daniel made, One thing is they talked of Hassan Nawaz's ability to be a six hitter. Unfortunately, we couldn't see that in the tournament, and there was complete lack of clarity around what they've planned for him or what their plans for him are. And that's exactly the same with someone like a Mohammad Haris, because early in the tournament you saw him come into bat in the power play. I think in the first game against India, and then as the tournament progressed, he kept slipping down the order. So again, there was a little bit of role clarity that was not, probably clear at least for to us from the outside. And also, I think they're underutilizing Shaheen Afridi, the batter, especially the ability to hit big. Yesterday, you thought that there was a possibility that, especially on the face of a collapse, you could have probably sent him in just to mix things up a little bit. But unfortunately, they stuck to two anchors and Hussein Talat hadn't had a great tournament. So I think, yeah, Afridi, um, as much as it may be a pressure on him to add more to his body of work and more to his workloads, I think he's shown the natural ability as a batter, something like what Rashid Khan does for Afghanistan. And we've seen Rashid constantly being underutilized, at least in the IPL, as a batter. I think Pakistan should definitely look to utilize Afridi a lot more in international cricket. You've
I
seen
think I
that.
think he's done. I think he's done so well as a low value wicket that he's certainly become a high value wicket, and they can't use him that way anymore.
Yeah.
Use him
That,
like the way they've done in the PSL, as I think you pointed out to a couple of times, right? In 2023, where you
Yeah.
single-handedly won them the final, with the bat. So, yeah, I mean, you ought to look at him as a low-value wicket, because the moment you start putting that pressure on him that his wicket counts for a lot, then it's obviously not going to work the same way.
yeah, Daniel, you wrote an interesting piece after, I think it was the second match, right? The Super Fours match between India and Pakistan. And the piece was titled The Things Pakistan Say versus the Things That They Do. And it seemed like in that piece, you were more critical of Pakistan because they were not showing enough aggressive intent in that Super Fours match against India. They had kind of slowed down in the middle against the spinners. I'll just read some stats both from this game and the tournament, and we can try and kind of decipher what's going on with Pakistan's batting. So in this game against spin, they faced 72 balls of spin and they attempted 34 aggressive shots. So they went after almost one in every two balls that they're facing of spin. And of course, that led to the 8 wickets falling off spin. But also, they only got 6 boundaries in those 34 aggressive shots. And if you look at their numbers, in particular against Kuldeep and Varun through the tournament, out of every they were attempting around 40% aggressive shots against Kuldeep and Varun, but they're only getting away about 1 in 6 of those shots. So they have a very low percentage. Even when they're playing the aggressive shots, they're not successful. If you look at, for example, India against spin in general in this tournament played around the same percentage of aggressive shots, but they have about a 30% success rate. And that every 10 times they hit an aggressive shot, at least three actually go for a boundary. So is the issue as much just in execution for Pakistan that they don't seem to have the tools to actually hit the spinners for boundaries? And that means that they then have to keep playing the aggressive shots because, okay, I've attempted my one aggressive shot for the over, but I haven't got it away. I've only got a single. So now I have to play another. And then eventually good bowlers like Kuldeep and Varun and Aksar are going to get you out. Is that as much the issue as a rush of blood to the head and going for the aggressive shot when you maybe shouldn't?
Yeah, that's a fair point. Well, especially because we mentioned Hassan Nawaz. One of the reasons Hassan Nawaz is out of the team that we can understand, even if we don't agree with, is that there's a perception that he struggles against elite spin. So he's done well against spin when he's been playing New Zealand, Bangladesh even, and then some of the smaller sides that Pakistan play. But against elite sides, he has been found out. He struggled against Afghanistan in the Tri-Series. The same with Harris, which is why initially he was batting in the power play, and then at times he'd been used lower down right at the deaths because Pakistan struggle against elite spin. And if you obviously struggle against elite spin, the absolute worst side that you can come up against is India in those middle overs, especially where they've been found out. The reason I made some of the points that I made was what Pakistan have identified is that with the way they used to play with Babar and Rizwan using the first 10 overs and then them trying to tee off at the end, they had a particular ceiling and they thought they'd gone as far as they could potentially playing that style of cricket. And then when Mike Hessen came in, one of the things he said was, "We are going to be aggressive all 20 overs because that's the modern way. That's the way we can maximize our run scoring abilities." To the extent that for a while, and I think this will continue now, he compromised Pakistan's bowling stock, saying we are going to continue to play bit part bowlers. We can get a few overs in off Fahim, who did well yesterday. I thought we can get a few overs through Saim. It was only after the second game in this Asia Cup that they even brought Haris Rauf in. They were just going in with one specialist base bowler in Shaheen. But when you do that and you say all we're going to do is be aggressive, then you'd better make sure you either get that right or at least try to attempt getting that right, because you don't have the bowlers to back it up anymore. And I think that's where a bit of that confusion comes in. Do they want to play with two or three anchors in the middle overs? If they do want to play with two or three anchors, they may not get to the score they want, and they might need to rely more on their bowling stocks. I still think they need to work out what their ultimate strategy is in terms of when they speed up and when they slow down in an innings. Because what we've seen is they've essentially transferred the slowdown from the first 10 overs to the second 10 overs, when because they do start off well now with Saim and Fakhr and Saibzada when they go coming, or when they're doing well. But then when wickets fall, they have people like Salman Ali Agha, who's the only batter in the top 40 actually in the Asia Cup, who doesn't have a strike rate of over 100. I think his strike rate's about 80 this tournament. And then you have Hussain Talat, who takes a while getting started. He did win them a game against Sri Lanka, but once again, that was a very different kind of game where you needed to anchor. Batting first, if you're not going to be as aggressive as you've said you want it to be, then there is, as Shashank mentioned, there's no role clarity in the side. No one knows what they're supposed to do. No one knows whether they're supposed to be batting in the power play or batting lower down. They don't quite know when to use Shaheen. They've shifted. I think he's batted in 4 different positions at a couple of games where he hasn't batted at all. And I think that lack of clarity is going to continue to hurt them, regardless of whether they win individual contests or not. Especially in these sorts of pressure games where whenever a wicket fell after Saim's wicket, it was almost impossible to say who would come in next, and it was almost as if they might have even have been deciding that on the fly. And that comes down to them still working out a template and them showing that there are inconsistencies between what they say their template is and when the pressure's on, what actually their template appears to be.
Yeah. Shashank, I mean, as baffling as it was at times the way Pakistan batted, we do have to give some credit to Kuldeep and Varun Chakravarti. And by the way, I will also, because I know that there's a certain percentage of our audience that is already going to be dropping off this podcast because we haven't talked about Sanju Samson. We will talk about his innings in a while. He has a lot of fans. But on Kuldeep and Varun, I thought what was really interesting was after the game, I think it was Varun or Kuldeep who actually brought out one of the analysts, right, to talk to the media or to do like an on-field interview, because he was talking about how important it was that the analysts were giving them information on where to land the ball. And then I went back and looked at some of the data, and in this game, I think 5 of the 8 wickets taken by the spinners were pitched outside off or wide outside off. So there was a clear plan to keep the ball out of the hitting arc, because they knew that the Pakistan batters are going to go for that slog or that sweep, make them reach for it. And there were also a couple of wickets on the cut, right, where you're going really wide, making them cut, and then you've got the fielders there. So, I mean, tell me from your perspective, like what Varun and Kuldeep did right. I mean, we all know that they're class bowlers, but in this tournament in particular, what stood out for you about them?
I think Varun looked a little desperate here. He spoke about being little over eager in the first couple of games, where he was going after wickets, and the moment he wasn't getting them, he was just a little twitchy. And then he sat down and worked on a few aspects, including analyzing the lengths that he should bowl, the ends that he should come from, where the end which gives him more success, or likely to give him more success, as against what he'd done earlier. So I think he's actually studied a couple of things, which he briefly alluded to in one of the press conferences and also in one of the broadcast interviews as well. And I think Varun figures out that there are certain lengths and certain kind of batters that he's comfortable bowling to, and when he's up against them, that Varun is in that position, or Varun has the edge. And you could see that when he was bowling yesterday against the left-handers, for example. Kuldeep, on the other hand, I think what he really has started to do a lot better than he did earlier in T20 cricket, from my point of view, is he is no longer, He's sequencing his deliveries better. He's no longer being very predictable with that wrong one that he used to bowl quite a lot of earlier on. And also, there was a lot more fizz of the surface, uh, especially in Dubai. I mean, Abu Dhabi was still a lot slower, but in Dubai there was a little bit of skid as well. And the one challenge that a lot of the spinners have faced consistently, which they have said is in Dubai especially, is the venue and the surfaces where they train and where they play matches are completely different. They don't have access to the main ground on non-match days, so they're bowling on wickets that are slightly different. Even as much as you try to replicate the same conditions, it's really hard to. And also, the training venue is a mixture of astroturf and grass. So, when dew comes in and you're trying to bowl and learn to counter dew, it's not quite the same as actually bowling in the Dubai International Stadium where there wasn't dew when they had actually prepared for it. So there are a couple of other factors that they've tried to factor in to their training, like bowling with soapy balls, trying to bowl with slightly wet balls of different magnitudes of wetness to just be able to get a little bit of control in. So these are things that just watching them at training, from afar, it looks like, oh, they're just going through the motion, they're just trying to hit sixes, bowlers are just bowling in. But actually, when you just get into the training session and watch objectively, you get to see and observe a lot more of these aspects, and there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes than what is actually visible on the surface. So I think the spinners have also done a lot of work, especially Kuldeep, Varun, Akshar as well. I mean, Akshar didn't have the kind of tournament that you would expect him to have as a left arm spinner. I think he was slightly a little too quicker, and also I think he didn't get his lengths quite right at different points in the tournament. But I think Varun and Kuldeep, in the, I mean, can't call it form of their life, maybe, I don't know, but I think there's no worry about them really.
Yeah, and they set up the game for India, but then of course India gave Pakistan a massive chance when they were chasing. Sunil Gavaskar was completely losing his cool in the commentary box. He was saying, "Don't open the door for Pakistan." At times, his commentary made me want to open the door and leave and never come back and watch cricket again. But that's a different story. Uh, what did you make for both of you guys? What did you make of India's approach in the chase? Because I think it's easy for us to look at a chase of 140 and say, well, of course you shouldn't get out hitting aggressive shots. But then, of course, you also don't want to be left in a situation where you've just left yourself too much to do over the back 10. Also, I think for a lot of India's players, these are just the shots that they practice the most. I mean, it's easy to say Abhishek Sharma should now suddenly change his game and bat at a 130 strike rate. But I mean, he's a 200 strike rate player. That's how he plays, right? I mean, that was kind of my explanation for what happened, that Abhishek is going to play the way that he does. Sky, actually, that was the first aggressive shot that he attempted, and it was just one where, again, I know people would say, well, why not hit the drive across along the ground? I think a lot of it with modern T20 batters is just a matter of practice, right? Sky probably practices the lofted drive more than he does the cover drive. So when he sees that ball there, he's going to go for that shot. I think Gill only attempted about two lofted shots, and he just happened to get out to one. Again, I know there's this old theory that once you've hit a boundary, you shouldn't try to hit another, but actually, a lot of modern data proves that the best thing to do in T20 cricket is when you hit a boundary, attempt another, because that's when the bowler is a bit rattled and might miss their length. So, for both of you guys, Daniel, did you feel that India were messing up that chase, or was it just one good bowling from Pakistan and India just kind of playing the way they do and then banking on the fact that they have this long batting lineup that can recover?
I was wondering last night if it all just boils down to something happening yesterday that hasn't happened all tournament, in that they, for the first time, couldn't rely on Abhishek to give them that blazing start. Because we've been saying, I think in the build up to the final, that Abhishek is due a failure because he's been so phenomenal all tournament, and then he started out exactly in the same vein. So in that second ball that he covered drove, I think, or maybe drove through point, Shaheen Afridi for four was one of the shots of the final. It was just a glorious shot. He basically just sort of blocked it and it went for four. But then what Pakistan realized, I think, off the back of partially that shot, was that pace on to Abhishek and pace on to these guys was not the way to go. All three of those wickets that fell in the first 4 overs fell either to cutters or slower balls. I think that's a good ball to bowl a wider outside off to Abhishek, that's the one that got him. And then because you said Surya Kumar obviously practices that lofted drive more, it's good to essentially toss it up and not give him the pace. If you give him pace, that's going to fly over the
And
infield and
Sky,
go for
by
four.
the way, I have run some data on him that shows that he does get out to slower balls actually quite often. So yeah, that was a smart choice. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing, I think he has a worse record for some reason against Pakistan than any of the other full member sides. So I think that may potentially just have been that. But once Abhishek got out, I thought India kind of lost the template of how to break the back of these middling chases. And couple that with obviously that this being a final and then just that extra pressure when every over they seem to be losing a wicket. Once you lose those first three, I think you can't really, at that point, you probably can't just continue to say, okay, we are going to continue to score at 9 and over and then leave nothing to the back end, because that's what you have that batting order for then. When your plan A hasn't worked, when you haven't scored those 55 in the power play, 85 and 10 to finish the chase off, then you have to rely on that secondary plan. And to India's credit, that's the one that came off. But Pakistan, I thought, bowled really well in the power play. It's not hindsight. I thought maybe Fahim in that sixth over was a third over too many, because the data I think shows that Haris in the power play in big games is actually better than he is at the death. So maybe if they'd got one of those Haris overs in early, they wouldn't have gotten themselves into that kind of mental confusion they did in those final 6 overs. But yeah, I think it's the first time in 2 years that Pakistan have bowled two bowlers for 6 overs in a power play. And while that Fahim over is questionable, you can also say that's because the two Pakistan bowlers that bowled in the power play were absolutely spot on in what they wanted to do and executing what they wanted out of that first power play to get 3 wickets to keep India. I think this is the third lowest score India have against Pakistan in power play history between the two sides. Their 5 over score was the lowest that's ever been, 25 for 2 or 25 for 3. So yeah, at that point, I think Pakistan's only task was to make sure that it wouldn't become a cakewalk for India, and that those first 5 overs ensured that it would not be.
Yeah, Shashank, your take on the first few overs for India, and then on that Samson innings and the Samson Tilak partnership that helped just bring the game back at least to some level of stability. It was far from done. In fact, you'd argue that Pakistan was still favorites even when Samson got out. But that was a crucial partnership. So what were your takes on that first 10 or 12 overs for India?
I think India have single-handedly relied on Abhishek Sharma all through the tournament. I mean, you've seen Surya Kumar Yadav barring that one innings against Pakistan where he made 47. He struggled for rhythm, batting rhythm. There's been an element of predetermined shots that he's played that's got him into trouble. Shubman Gill has also rode on that Abhishek Sharma, turbochargers up front. So he also kind of not really the best comeback into the T20 side for him. I mean, there were a couple of sparkling innings, especially in that game against Pakistan, the second one where there was a little bit of needle between the opposition, and Shubman Gill, was actually a lot more fired up than I've ever seen him. At least in white ball cricket. I mean, you saw he was what he can be in Test cricket. In white ball cricket, I've never seen him that charged like he was in that game, and he showed what he can do. But I don't think it was a really great tournament for him from a batting standpoint. He got off to starts, but there was a sense that he'd missed out. Um, and then, of course, Sanju Samson. I mean, um, starts off, everyone's thinking he's going to be the number three, or he's going to be an opener to begin with, and then obviously with Shubman Gill back now, they've got to accommodate him somewhere. You'd think probably that'll be number three, but then there's Surya, and then there's Tilak. So finally they settle on a middle order position. Then there's a game where just a couple of games prior, I think the Bangladesh game, where he's
Yeah.
not even batting at number six or number seven. He's demoted even below down the order. So I think there's still a little bit of confusion around whether Sanju Samson is your best man to take down spin. Is he the best man to, man those middle overs? Because obviously we've seen Jitesh being a lot more proactive in terms of his approach, shot selection, and just the way he trains. Jitesh Sharma, in fact, 1 month before the Indian team arrived in Dubai, he was already here. He'd conducted a few training sessions all on his own at the ICC Academy and worked on, just his range of shots and range hitting, especially. He had a couple of sessions, I think, with Dinesh Karthik as well. So he's actually, trained for one particular role. Whereas with Samson, you get the feeling that, He's training in a certain way, but the role that he's been given is completely different, and that is where Samson's kind of been caught in between. Having said that, I think yesterday he also was slightly lucky in the sense that he got dropped
Yeah,
at
he got
T20
dropped. Yeah.
wicket. Yeah, so I think that had that catch been taken again, a completely different outcome altogether. But Samson again, I'm not entirely convinced that the role that he's got at number five, number six, they're maximizing him in the best possible way, because if you saw Akshar didn't get a chance to bat in the final. I mean,
Yeah.
Akshar, and you know what he's capable of, and he played a very
Especially against a leg spinner, he would have been somebody who you would think
exactly,
would
and he
come in
and he
and
played a
disrupt.
defining
Yeah.
knock in the T20 World Cup final,
Yeah.
where he took a lot of pressure off Virat Kohli at that point, where India lost a bunch of wickets. So with that kind of depth available and variety available, are they maximizing Sanju Samson in this role in the middle order where he's a floater? I'm not entirely sure. Having said that, I think his keeping was fairly okay. I mean, he took a couple of good skiers in general. But the one thing that really stood out is the kind of fan following the guy has. I mean, it's unbelievable. Someone was telling me the other day that the local Malayali Association has been trying to get him on board for some multiple events. And he simply had to, turn down as many as some 10 or 15 events in the last 10, 15 days that, he's been here. So the guy's popularity is at an all-time high. I don't think that's ever going to, fade away. But I think just specifically to his role, I don't know what can really be done. I mean, at this point, because even
No,
in the
but this is
IPL,
actually,
not that
this is
bad.
leading me to my next talking point very nicely, because I wanted to actually discuss big picture for both India and Pakistan a little bit. Of course, for India now, they've won the Asia Cup. It's easy to say, well, just keep this 15, keep the formula the same, but there are a lot of legitimate questions. Samson's role is one. As you mentioned, Gill, there was a lot of actually surprising pushback when he was named in the 15. People saying you're just trying to squeeze him in because he's a brand, because he's the test captain. Is he actually your best option as T20 opener? Or is he the best option considering your combination? Is it better to have Sanju Samson up at the top and create another role for a middle order batter? Because we saw a lot of chopping and changing of the batting lineup, which I don't mind to an extent, because yes, it's T20s and you do want to change positions based on matchup. But I think Rohit Sharma once had this term where he said Tawai Macha, and he was saying that's what should not happen. And it happened a little bit for India in this tournament. Do you think, Shashank, the Indian team will be looking at making some strategic changes? Because the one thing that stood out for me again is that this is actually an era where India have a lot of finishers and batters who are good at batting in the back end. And India are not necessarily using them. I mean, you have players like Rinku Singh, who obviously only made it in the final because Hardik Pandya is injured. You have Riyan Parag in the reserves. There are even players like Shashank Singh, Namandhir. There's a whole list of these guys who are doing the job of finisher in the IPL. But yet, for India, your 5, 6 includes guys like Dube, Samson, Aksar, who are actually probably all better off in the top four. So, do you think India, despite winning this, will have a bit of a rethink as to what kind of batting lineup they want to go into the next T20 series with?
I mean, the next T20 series is against Australia, 5 games in Australia. So, I mean, I think that's a very good barometer for them to, test what they can achieve, in terms of their own combinations. But I think India, I mean, they're in a position now where they can use the remainder of their runway into the World Cup to fine tune these positions, the one or two positions where there's considerable debate about. I mean, you're never going to know what Jitesh brings to the table unless you give him a fair run of opportunities like you've given Sanju. I mean, so I think it's Australia is a great opportunity for them to, give him a chance to see what he brings to the table. And similarly, I think I'd like to see, Arshdeep Singh, for example, he's your number one bowler, highest wicket taker in T20s. He plays a certain role in the team. I'm not entirely convinced that that's an idea that on Australian wickets that they'd look to just play one frontline seamer and Jasprit Bumrah and have Hardik Pandya being the all round option coming in. So how that will change the dynamics will be very interesting, because then if you're going to play two seamers and then one all rounder in Hardik, and with Dube doing as well as he has, then how are you going to fit in Varun and Kuldeep if your batting order is not going to be compromised as a a number of combination questions for India to think about. But I think they've got five in Australia against Australia in Australia. Then they've got I think 5 against South Africa. They've got 5 against New Zealand. So the 15 games leading into the World Cup is enough number of games for you to identify and get these last 2 3 slots completely uh, opportunities to guys you think are potentially in the mix.
Yeah, I want to come back to some of India's bowling strategy also and that idea of using both Varun and Kuldeep. But let's talk Pakistan big picture now, Daniel. Oh, you've talked about how I think there's a few players who you feel may not be, necessarily the right options in the batting lineup. I mean, there's even some people from our staff, including our editor, who's been joking, saying that they may as well have just bring Riz Babar back because then at least they'll get 165, even if they don't get 190. And I think am I right in saying Pakistan only got 150 plus once in this tournament?
Yes, that's correct. They got
Yeah,
150 plus against India in that second game.
in the second game. Yeah.
Um, in the
And
second
then
game,
bowled
they're all
UAE out for a low score. So yeah,
they may also I think they also got 160 if I'm not wrong against Oman in the first game. So I think that's two. You might want to check that. Other
right.
than that, yeah. And at the same time, they are the side that defended the two lowest totals this Asia Cup as well, 146 against the UAE and then 135 against Bangladesh in that must-win game. So the bowling still very much plays a central role in how they play their T20 cricket. Yeah, the other thing, the Babar Rizwan thing is actually not as not as funny or non-serious as you might think. There's every chance that they could be back for some of the games that they play next. They play three T20Is against South Africa next month. South Africa coming for a full tour, two tests, three ODIs. Then they have a try series with Sri Lanka and Afghanistan at home. They have three T20Is against Australia. The dates for which haven't been set yet. So there's some T20 cricket, and I think there's still potentially a way to tweak how they go about their batting lineup. But then that idea that a wholesale change might happen again, the Babar is one thing, or maybe even one of those two to potentially just anchor reliably. Because the worst thing you can have is an anchor who is not reliable, and that's one of the things that's been happening with Agha and Hossein Talat in the middle order. So they may potentially turn to that as a bit of a safety blanket. But at the same time, as a big picture, my take on this is I think Pakistan may end up taking the wrong lessons from this Asia Cup. They may think that they are essentially just, a couple of hits away from the best T20 side in the world. And yeah, a little bit of variance essentially prevented them from being champions. Whereas those sorts of games, at the same time, you have to remember 2 days ago, they should have been knocked out against Bangladesh, who sort of bottled the chase, basically. 11 days ago, there was a good chance that they should have been knocked out by the UAE. They was fighting to get out of their own group where they posted a below par total, and then for a little while looked like UAE might make a fist of that as well. They lost to T20 to Afghanistan in that try series that they did end on to go up winning. Pakistan's problem remains its inconsistency. They do sort of get themselves up for the occasion, like these India-Pakistan games. We say in football, for example, that form goes out of the window in a derby, so it almost doesn't matter what your form is. But when it's against a big team, you will look more competitive than your true quality actually suggests. So I think those are the lessons Pakistan might take, but there is still a lot more work to be done than perhaps the result or the closeness of that final might suggest. And they've still got 3 or 4 months and plenty of T20 as before that T20 World Cup. Mike Hessen still seems to want to continue with his own philosophy and what he's said he's trying to do with the side. So it'll be interesting to see whether they stick to that or whether in true Pakistan fashion they just rip it up at any random point in the next few months and start again for the World Cup.
Shashank, any takes on what Pakistan should be doing with their batting or just in their T20 side, or are you taking the Rohit Sharma line that you will only disclose that when you become
अगर मैं
Pakistan coach?
पाकिस्तान का कोच बना था No, I think firstly they need to back players in certain roles and give them a long rope, which they haven't done clearly in this tournament. And secondly, I hope they don't shelve Mike Hessen's philosophy of wanting to slightly play differently. He's trying to bring in a culture change in the team. So I'm not sure they should immediately, press the panic button and go back to Babar and Rizwan and, bring back the old habits of innings accumulation and then trying to tee off at the death. They've clearly, want to go in a new direction. And even if immediate results haven't pointed to, a lot of encouraging signs, I think they should stick to the methods. And thirdly, I hope that as a coach, they give him a little bit of continuity, because you can't have coaches coming in, going out. I mean, you've seen the revolving door that they've had with the selectors, and truckloads of selectors have, been in the job and, left in the last 2, 3 years. I don't think that's the way you can really build forward, and especially given the run up to the next World Cup is pretty short now, we're less than 6 months away. I think he should be given the freedom to mold the T20 side the way he thinks is the best way possible. And I think at least from his time at RCB, you could, and he achieved fairly good results. I mean, RCB fans would know that 3 playoffs in 4 seasons under him is a fairly good result. I mean, we all know how difficult it is to make the playoffs in the IPL. So he's got a body of work, and I think one of the things that he's very, very big on is data analytics. And at some point, if you saw him, during the competition at different points of time, he was, right at the edge of the boundary, signaling to the captain, signaling to the players to bring on certain bowlers at different times to just bring about change. So they need to give him that time. They need to give him that space. So don't shelve whatever you've tried to build because results haven't gone the way. That's the one thing that I think they should definitely try and do going forward.
Yeah. And he was, by the way, also on the boundary when Haris was bowling, telling him to bowl that wide Yorker. He was the one who kind of got him to finally realize he needs to change his plan. And of course, we also saw a lot of animation from the Indian coach, Gautam Gambhir, at the end of the match, finally showing a lot of emotion, which he sometimes doesn't. But Shashank, does he also have things to think about in terms of India's bowling strategy? Because I know you mentioned the next T20 Is will be in Australia, where they will probably go with a different strategy and have 2 pacers. But given that the next T20 World Cup is in India, is this a long-term strategy going with Kuldeep, Varun, and Bumrah as just 3 specialist bowlers, and then relying on Hardik Aksar and Shivam Dube to make up the rest of the overs? And also, I think more than that, the thing that surprised a lot of people, including me, was the use of Bumrah, giving him 3 overs in the power play in almost every game. They finally changed it for the final, but in every match before that, they gave him 3 overs in the power play. And you can see somewhat of the logic of that because we saw in the Bangladesh game where that can be effective, right? Where he bowled his 3 overs for just 17 runs, took a wicket. It was a brilliant spell, by the way. And because Bangladesh were then went slowly in the power play, they only got about 42 in the power play. They then immediately had to go after Kuldeep and Varun in the seventh and eighth overs, where very often in T20 cricket, that seventh, eighth overs is where you kind of reassess. The spinners come in, you look at the field spread out, and then you decide how you want to go about it. The idea, I guess, of bowling Bumrah early is that you don't give teams that option. So then your spinners are most effective. But you do run the risk that if you're left in a situation where a team is only 3 down and there's 4 overs to get. And this is where, to be honest, I mean, I go back even in that Bangladesh game, some of the batting strategy was a bit baffling, as well as this strategy from Pakistan, because that could have been India's weakness, which wasn't exposed, the death bowling. Of course, in the
Which,
final,
which
they
which
had.
is where Sri
Yeah.
Lanka should have completely gotten those runs in that game. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, if you're in a situation where India are defending 50 in 5 overs and you just have 1 over of Bumrah, teams can still afford to play him off that over, get 5 or 6, and then chance themselves to get 45 or 46 of the last 4 overs. But the equation completely shifts if you have 2 overs of Bumrah. Then you can't really try to play off those 2 overs because you're giving yourself way too much to score in the last three. So I think there are merits and demerits in using Bumrah the way India have. The way they've used him at the Asia Cup is exactly what Surya Kumar Yadav explained, saying that that kind of puts more and more pressure on the opposition to take down their spinners, and the quality of India spinners are so good that they keep coming at you, and then they'll keep nipping out wickets one by one, which they've done by the truckloads with Kuldeep bowling the way he has. So it's worked for India, but again, whether it's a long-term solution, I'm not entirely sure. We'll only know how it pans out in Australia, because obviously, the quality of death overs batting in Australia, with Tim David, in the form that he's in right now, he's not going to, play out anyone in the death. You saw what he could do at the IPL. So the quality of death overs batting that they will contend with in Australia is far superior to what they did in the Asia Cup.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one other option they would have is because Shivam Dube now, as you said, is really coming on as a bowler. If he can bowl a little bit more in the power play, which they were reluctant to use him till the final, where he eventually had to bowl in the power play. But if he can bowl an over or two in the power play, then you can still have the strategy of Kuldeep Varun, but you can bowl maybe 1 or 2 overs of Bumrah in the power play, let Hardik and Shivam Dube bowl there, and then keep some overs of Bumrah back for the middle overs and the death. So that could be one option. But yeah, I mean, even for India, I do think even though they've won this tournament, there's still a lot of, I mean, time left in the T20 World Cup, and you have to remember they will face better quality of opposition. Ultimately, Pakistan are the seventh ranked T20 side in the world, even though they made a real game of the final. So that's another question for India is that, okay, is this necessary proof that our methods are working or that our tactics are right? Anyway, I just want to ask, as you guys, I mean, I'll let you guys go in a bit, but what are your final feelings about this tournament? Obviously, I'm sure it's been quite tough to cover because of all the off-field tension and everything. What are your final feelings, firstly, Daniel, about Pakistan as a cricket side, but also, what this might mean now for the next T20 World Cup and some of the other things that we're going to have to figure out in terms of India and Pakistan playing each other. I think that'll be the next time they play each other, if they do end up playing each other there. So, what are your feelings about that right now?
I think what a lot of people feared was the worst case off-field scenario has actually happened has emerged in all its ugliness. Frankly, I don't think people liked. I do think it does turn people off cricket in general and India Pakistan contest when all that you're talking about is how the teams interact rather than what actually happens on the field. I think the way the tournament has ended, people will not remember sort of the thrilling final and the last few overs where it looked like the game could go either way. People will remember that ridiculous 90-minute wait for a trophy that never emerged. India won something that was never presented to them, and India and Pakistan and India ended up having a go at each other in the press conferences. The fact that they played each other three times, it's ironic that the one time they played each other three times, but the one time they just didn't want to see each other at all. So I think from that point of view, I fear that this will be a new normal in India-Pakistan relations because once you open the door to this sort of unseemliness, I don't see how you close it back. If you, for example, if you haven't shaken hands right now, why would you shake hands in Colombo in 6 months' time? So I think once you get onto that off ramp can be really hard to find. You just keep going up the escalatory ladder. On the pitch, I think well I'm not sure we learned too much new when it comes to India. I think everyone knew that India are better than any of the other Asian sides there are, and they showed that by not losing a single game. I kept asking a few people when the last time it was they lost T20 game. I just I just couldn't remember. Apparently, there was one against England. Um, but then with Pakistan, I think reaching the final is in some ways the best case scenario because they're not the best Asian side. They could have a case to be potentially the second best Asian side for a while. It could have been so much worse, and then it wasn't. And one of the things that they will take away from this is that this, regardless of what might be said, is still, I think, on both sides, still viewed as a rivalry because it does matter and the pressure does get to both sides. India don't really have any business taking a Pakistan game to the final over, given just how much better they are in terms of their depth, in terms of their quality, in terms of their experience. But that Pakistan took them there will encourage them that there are certain big match moments where they can still perform in a way that gives them hope of big titles in the near future rather than this long rebuild, which I don't think there's any appetite for right now, given Pakistan have had a rough few years now. I think once again they'll target the T20 World Cup because they think they can win some of these individual games. But what I hope for them is that they also understand that that gulf that exists is still quite real and there's still a ways to go to bridge that. And I hope they use this time wisely.
I think it's been a fabulous tournament from a cricketing standpoint, but of course, overshadowed by the off-field drama and activities. I'm someone who always champions the cause of the underdog, so I'd like to see a lot more of the likes of UAE, Oman get opportunities on a regular basis, and if it means it's on the Asian platform and at an Asia Cup, why not? I mean, you would ideally think that these guys need opportunities to play in the domestic tournaments in India. Like imagine Oman and UAE or Hong Kong, all these guys playing in the Duleep Trophy or or the one-day tournaments, the Vijay Hazare in some form. I mean, that'll add a lot more competitive streak to them and develop their
Yeah, which for example, Scotland did for a while in some of England's domestic tournaments, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So you think that the bigger teams, the Asian teams, owe it to the smaller ones to build, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be happening on a consistent basis. So I think this tournament showed a lot of merit in why they should be doing that. I know it feels really long, too far back now to think of the fact that you had these guys compete in the tournament. So I think that's one thing that the bigger teams should try and do. Apart from that, I think, yeah, I feel a little hollow already, feel a little empty already, that I'm not chasing up on, which match referee is officiating the game, or which match referee is presiding over a hearing, or which team is canceling a practice session, or which team is canceling a press conference. So all the, the buzz and the anticipation that comes with the tournament, I think, yeah,
I think
suddenly from there you're down there. So I feel a little hollow at this point. But from a reporting standpoint, it's been kind of one of the more volatile tournaments. In the press box, you've seen, you've interacted with people, some of the most cordial people. But obviously, the such has been the tension between India, Pakistan, especially, that it's almost been palpable when the same set of people are sitting at the press conference room asking questions to each other. So the dynamics have been slightly different, but I can safely say that Daniel and I shook hands. So yeah, it's been all good on that front. So from a reporting standpoint, a tournament like no other, but I think it's still been a lot of fun.
yeah, I mean on the
And
match referee point.
Shashank didn't give me a trophy, but I can confirm I would have taken it off him.
Yeah, and on the match referee front, one of our scorers already wants to know if Andy Pycroft is the match referee for the first India-West Indies test, which I don't yet have an answer on. But anyway, we'll leave it at that. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And it's been, as I said, an extraordinary Asia Cup, exciting in many ways, ugly in others. But we hope that we've done justice to the tournament and recapping everything that happened. And stay tuned to the next episode of Rock and Roll It, where the beards will, I'm sure, be back. Siddharth Monga is right now in a place with no network. He says low network coverage, but he was still following the Asia Cup, I'm sure, even if it was just through the Cricinfo WhatsApp chat. So stay tuned to hear him back on the next episode of Rock and Roll It.
TV umpire to director, we have a review. Can you rock and roll it for me, please?